Hello friends. Today is January 20th, 2026, and this is a fresh review of the battle map. Well, it looks like Ukraine may face a serious, large-scale strike from the Russian army in the near future. Zelensky is speaking about this, and now practically all news sources are writing that massive strikes across the territory of Ukraine are expected in the coming days. Although let me remind you that strikes are already happening every day. Hundreds of drones are launched at Ukraine daily, and ballistic missiles are used. But there is a feeling that something larger and heavier is currently being prepared. As you know, most Ukrainian power plants have already been effectively put out of commission. In essence, only nuclear power plants remain as major facilities, and it is most likely that the Russian side will not strike them directly. However, another scenario is possible: strikes on electrical substations and power grid nodes that ensure the power supply and stable operation of these NPPs. Also, one cannot rule out strikes on the so-called decision-making centers, especially in the western part of the country. Personally, I believe that the Russian army will most likely strike either decision-making centers or warehouses and facilities where weapons and ammunition arriving from Western countries are stationed. What do you think? If the strike is indeed massive, what targets might it hit? And now, moving on to the front. Friends, the past 24 hours can be called quite productive for the Russian side. The Russian army has advanced on 6 sectors simultaneously during this time. Therefore, without further delay, let's move on to the breakdown of the situation. But before that, I want to mention one interesting point. Yesterday, I was sent a video from the Zaporizhzhia region. Ukrainian soldiers found a Russian drone on the road, and their sapper decided to try to disable it, obviously to use it later against the Russian army. The video is truly unusual, but the most important thing in it is the finale. One of the soldiers who is filming says that they shouldn't try to take it, and approximately 20 seconds later, the munition detonates. I have added the clip to my Telegram channel. If you are interested in such materials, you will find the link in the description. Now for the advances. We start from the north, namely from the northern part of the Kyiv region. An advance on a small bridgehead has been recorded there. Look, in the Kyiv region, there is the Vovchansk bridgehead, the Milov bridgehead, and between them is another very small section, essentially a bridgehead where for a long time only one village, Degtyan, was held. The settlement was occupied long ago, and in this direction the front had essentially stood still for a long time. There were no significant changes, but over the past 24 hours, the control zone here has been expanded, and expanded quite noticeably. To help you understand the scale, the advance occurred on a section approximately 5 kilometers wide. In most cases, the depth is not too great, but it is still movement forward. For instance, in the area of the settlement of Nestern, Russian forces advanced about 1 kilometer, reaching the outskirts. In the area of the village of Krula, the advance was about 700 meters in depth, and the most serious result was recorded in the area of Degtyan itself. There, the advance was 2 kilometers 750 meters. The entire territory taken under control in this sector totals more than 6 square kilometers, which is a truly solid indicator, especially for a direction where there had been practically no changes for several months. As for the prospects of this sector, let's just say I don't expect anything grand here yet. But considering the current activation, it is quite likely that in the near future, battles for Nestern and Krula will begin. Furthermore, the task will likely be to cut off the salient and level the front line, that is, to bring it to a more convenient configuration. In that case, the Russian army will likely also try to take the villages of Shebelny and Pishchain in the near future. But as I already noted, this activation by itself does not yet mean anything strategically large-scale. Most likely, we are observing the same picture here as in, for example, the Sumy region. New points of tension and new pressure zones are being created to stretch the UAF forces and prevent them from even having the opportunity, however it may sound, to even think about any offensive operations. No matter how Zelensky tries to say that Ukraine cannot sit on the defensive indefinitely and that there are allegedly already plans for offensive actions, the tactics of the Russian troops now look different. It is the creation of many new pain points across various sectors, and this strategy, by all appearances, is working. Judge for yourselves. If in 2023, The UAF had a major offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia region, and in 2024, at some point they had a relatively successful Kursk operation. Then in 2025, they did not have a single offensive operation that was even remotely comparable in scale to those events. And the local offensive attempts that were undertaken ultimately yielded almost zero results. They went on the offensive in the Pokrovsk direction, and what was the result? In the end, they reclaimed nothing substantial. In some places, they briefly recaptured several villages, but then lost them anyway. There was also the Kupiansk offensive operation, but there too no grand results are visible yet. The city itself has never been reclaimed. And the Dobropilya offensive is not a classic offensive at all, but rather a counter-offensive operation. And even there, despite individual successes when they managed to push back Russian forces in some areas, these territories are now starting to slip out of control again. Therefore, I am certain in 2026 we will see a roughly similar picture. Now about the Kupiansk direction. Today, news and video materials are mostly coming from there. A video also arrived from the settlement of Pishchane. It was from this point that material was received, showing the forward positions of the RF armed forces. These positions came under a strike from a UAF FPV drone. At the same time, let me remind you that this territory was previously marked as controlled by the Russian side, despite the fact that some pro-Russian sources continue to write about the expansion of the control zone. There is also news directly from Kupiansk itself. The Ukrainian side claims that it is managing to achieve serious results and displace Russian units, but no confirming materials from the Ukrainian side have appeared. Nevertheless, strikes are carried out daily on UAF positions in this settlement. Russian troops at the moment hold the northern and eastern parts of Kupiansk. No confirmed advancement, neither Russian nor Ukrainian, has been recorded as of today. However, combat actions continue, and the battles for Kupiansk remain extremely fierce, moving further across the map. Reports are also coming in from the Veliki Burluk direction. Today the news concerns the settlements of Katny, Ambane, and Milov. Encounter battles continue there, exactly what I was talking about yesterday, and today confirmation of the same picture is arriving. Furthermore, there are reports of a breakthrough of the front line on a new section of the combat contact. Let's move to it. In the area of the settlements of Degtyan and Nestern, an advance of Russian units has been recorded. Video materials were obtained from these 2 points showing the forward positions of Russian forces. Here, the control zone was expanded by several kilometers deep into the front. There are also reports that assault actions are being conducted against the settlement of Nestern, and assault actions are also underway in the area of the settlement of Krula, and Russian forces continue to expand the control zone. As of today, the entire territory marked in red has passed under the full control of the Russian side. Let's continue. The next sector, where an advance by the Russian army has been recorded, is the Lyman direction. There, an extremely important step was achieved, establishing control over a 2-kilometer section of the Zareknoye-Lyman highway. Yes, we are not yet talking about full control over the entire highway, but it is a serious step in that direction. If control over the road is expanded, the pocket to the north will be cleared, and thus the opportunity will arise to create a tight blockade of the city from the northeastern side. However, this is no longer a prospect for January, it is more likely a story for February. Video material also arrived from this point. Forward positions of the RF armed forces were recorded there, and the entire territory marked in red has passed under the full control of Russian forces. In the near future, a leveling of the front line and the clearing of pockets are expected. All territory to the west of the settlement of Zareknoye will almost certainly pass under Russian control. And since I read all the comments, many are asking, tell us what is happening in Stavki. I cannot say anything specific about Stavki. Active combat operations are taking place there, and I immediately voice any information that appears in open sources. I am not personally there, so I cannot claim exactly what is happening on the ground. As soon as confirmed information appears, I share it with you immediately. The same applies to Drobyshevo. Active combat operations continue here. No confirmed advances have been recorded at the moment. As soon as there is objective fixation of changes, we will make adjustments to the map and, as always, I will certainly inform you about everything. However, at the same time, a rather difficult situation is developing for the UAF in the Lyman area, because Russian troops are now effectively bypassing Lyman from two directions at once. From the western side, they are trying to gain a foothold and expand control in the forested areas, and they are also entering from the southeastern direction, enveloping the settlement in an arc. As a result, Lyman is gradually finding itself in a situation close to encirclement. Practically all supply roads are under fire control, and some of the routes have already passed under the direct physical control of the Russian army. As of today, these are the news and changes for this sector. Moving on to the Konstantinovka direction. At the moment, the picture here is without obvious changes. It is reported that Russian troops continue to exert pressure in the direction of Stepanovka, Dolga Balka toward Ilyanovka, as well as in the direction of Berestokh. In parallel, FPV crews are actively working on UAF positions. Armored vehicles are being hunted in the Konstantinovka area, and artillery is not reducing its intensity. Today, confirming material came from only one point. Forward positions of the RF armed forces were located there. The Russian side reports the following. The armed forces of the Russian Federation have strengthened control over the highway at the eastern entrance to Konstantinovka from the direction of Stupochki, expanding the control zone to approximately 1 kilometer along the line of combat contact. At this same point, units of the RF armed forces came under fire from the UAF. However, it should be reminded that previously this territory on the map was already marked as being under Russian control. Now, additional materials have been received confirming the expansion of the control zone, or rather, firm control over this territory. Moving further, no notable news has been received regarding the Alexandrovka and Konstantinovka sectors over the past 24 hours. Although this point is debatable, because an extremely significant advance occurred in the area of the Dobropilya direction, and the question arises whether to attribute it to the Dobropilya or the Konstantinovka sector. We are talking about the occupation of Novopavlovka. Fighters of the center grouping managed to advance from Sofievka by more than 3 kilometers and dislodge UAF units from Novopavlovka. Moreover, thanks to this, Russian forces reached the southeastern outskirts of Pavlovka, because Novopavlovka and Pavlovka essentially form a single mass and are linked to each other. And in my view, it is more logical to attribute this specifically to the Konstantinovka sector, because further on, the chain develops quite obviously. Pavlovka will follow Novopavlovka, then Torskoye, and after Torskoye, Rayskoye. And what do we see in practice? We see the formation of a western pincer of the envelopment of Konstantinovka with the prospect of an exit toward Druzhkovka. After Shahov was pushed through, it becomes noticeable that the Russian army, specifically the center grouping, is beginning to succeed in building steady pressure here. Both Sofievka and Novopavlovka are already under control, plus battles for Turetsky continue. Thus, the envelopment is forming gradually, not lightning fast, but confidently and steadily. Also, over the past 24 hours, there was success north of Pokrovsk. There, they managed to advance on a section more than 3 kilometers wide and establish control over the territory of the pig farms. Yes, previously Russian forces had already occupied these positions and then rolled back, but back then the control was unstable. Now they have managed to finally clear this area and dig in. Further development could go both north and west to increase pressure on Hryshyn and finally dislodge the UAF from this powerful fortified area, which creates a lot of problems. This is because as long as Ukrainian forces hold out in Hryshyn, they retain the ability to regularly launch strikes and carry out assaults on the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk. Moving to the Gulyai-Pol direction, today is without any serious changes here. However, reports are coming in. It is said that Russian troops are expanding the control zone to the west of Gulyai-Pol, and the expansion is being called substantial. Also, some sources claim that assault groups are trying to gain a foothold in the area of Zaliznichne, Zheleznodorozhnoye, but such reports have appeared repeatedly before, and there has been no confirmation of this. Ukrainian sources, in turn, state that the Ukrainian military is counterattacking in the direction of Gulyai-Pol, and that Russian forces allegedly do not fully control this settlement. Of course, each side writes about its successes, and the real situation only becomes clear after the appearance of confirming materials. The last confirmation came from this point. Forward positions of Russian units were recorded on the far western outskirts of Gulyapol. From this, one can conclude that Gulyapol is indeed under the control of Russian forces, and the statements of the Ukrainian side about supposedly successful counterattacks, based on available data, do not correspond to reality. The same applies to Sviatopetrovka. Some pro-Russian sources are again marking Sviatopetrovka as fully taken, claiming that the settlement has been cleared and has already passed under the control of the Russian army. However, even the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has not yet announced the full capture of Sviatopetrovka. Therefore, it is possible that reports from individual sources here are somewhat premature. Strikes also continue on Starukranka, and Russian troops maintain pressure in the direction of the settlement of Vozdvizhivka. Here, FPV drone hits and artillery strikes on UAF positions, as well as on temporary deployment points of Ukrainian units, continue to be recorded. And separately, I will remind you of an important point. The UAF in this direction has lines of fortifications and fortified areas located in the fields. Therefore, Russian troops cannot move close to the settlements until these fortified positions are cleared. Moving further and turning to the Zaporizhzhia region. On the Orakov sector, there are no changes for now. The UAF continues its counterattacks. Over the past 24 hours, according to reports, nearly 4 dozen UAF fighters, 1 tank, 1 self-propelled artillery unit, 4 armored combat vehicles, and more than 10 cars were put out of action. As you can see, the Ukrainian command is investing serious forces to stop the so-called Far East Express and prevent Russian units from first reaching Orakov and then the eastern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia. We will see how this ends. Personally, I believe that the Vostok East grouping, despite the powerful assaults from the UAF, will be able to wait out this wave of pressure and then continue its advance forward anyway. And finally, the zone of responsibility of the Dnieper grouping. 2 sections of advancement were recorded here. The control zone east of Shcherbaki was expanded slightly. They managed to advance by about 300 meters. Furthermore, the fighters established control over Pavlovka. Now the key task is to close the pocket along this road, linking up with positions in Mali Shcherbaki. Meanwhile, battles for Novoyakovlivka continue. To give a general summary of the past 24 hours, 2 settlements and approximately 20 square kilometers of territory have passed under the control of the Russian army. No advances were recorded for the UAF over the past 24 hours. Well, that's all I have for the situation at the front for today.